Welcome back everybody to another Let's Talk Tarantula videos, and today we're going to be ranking every food that I have fed my tarantulas and usually just what is the most popular option, since I definitely have some strong opinions about some of these, especially since I've experimented more around Christmas with what I was feeding my tarantulas as a little gift. And yeah, so in front of me I have the tier list, and you know what, let's just jump right in and talk about each individual thing and kind of break it down. We're going to look at it from a financial perspective, from a convenience perspective, and from an accessibility perspective to kind of generate these ratings. Which, to begin, we have a little cricket here. Now, I love the crickets. They are fantastic. They don't really hurt your tarantula unless they've just molted, and they are also super accessible, super cheap, and I would say the only rough part about them is that they are very stinky. I keep crickets for like 8 hours in a container so I can gut load them, and they smell so bad. It smells like death, and I put them in my trash can and they make my whole room smell. So that's my only critique about them. But otherwise, this is definitely my go-to feeder, especially if you get them from like a local pet store that's more catered toward exotics instead of a chain pet store. Usually they live a lot longer and they're even cheaper and they smell better. But another consequence is that they don't live very long whenever you're taking care of them, and they are extremely difficult to breed. I tried to breed crickets on my own. I didn't realize how extensive the process is. They need like 7 different things. They need a breeding box, and then they'll eat their babies. They're cannibals. And overall, that just makes them like a little bit difficult. So if you're buying them every month, it can add up a bit. It's definitely not as cheap as being able to breed your own feeder, but this is definitely one of my go-tos, and I'm gonna put it on the A tier since I think it's still very, very good. S tier is definitely for fantastic feeders, like very little flaws to their benefits. And next up, we have the grasshopper, which I think is the cricket but worse. They're a lot stronger, so they can actually put a fight up with your tarantula, especially if your tarantula is a little soft from molting and all. And they're a little bit pricier. I don't really see them around, and honestly, I don't like them. Most of the time when people are feeding these, they're just wild caught ones from outside, which wild caught feeders is not very good for your tarantula due to the risk of insecticides and other poisons that people have sprayed the grass with or anything. So I'm gonna put this one in C tier. I don't really like it. Now here we have a little mealworm. I like superworms personally, so we're gonna get to that one next. But mealworms are alright. They're like a little too small in my opinion. And the thing I hate most about them is that they dig the second you put them in the enclosure, and it really, really annoys me. So I would say, from a different perspective, this would be a B tier feeder since it does work and these guys are very easy to maintain. And for superworms, I'm gonna put them up with A because I also have a bias for them. I love them. They're a little bit bigger, so your tarantula is actually getting like a full meal. And they're also super easy to keep. And they're also not super expensive, all of that jazz. I like them a lot more than I like mealworms. But I guess if you're feeding like a much smaller tarantula, mealworms might be the way to go. But a lot of my tarantulas just don't like these guys. They feel them and they think that's gross and they don't want to eat them. So maybe the hard shell throws them off, but sometimes this just doesn't work, which I never really have the issue with crickets. Next up is whenever the mealworm or the superworm pupates. And honestly, I'm gonna put this S tier because I found that they love them. It can't hurt them, and it's basically like already half digested for them since it's pupating inside. I think it can't get better than that. If they just sold pupas, I would be feeding those all of the time. They're a little bit gross whenever you hold them and they start wiggling in your hands, but all of my tarantulas love them. I've never had an issue with feeding these, and they don't just start digging into the ground and I have to tear up the entire enclosure to find them because my tarantula didn't pick it up in time. And since they do move with a little bit of movement, your tarantula can actually find them, so I absolutely love that. Next up, we have Dubia roaches. Now, Dubia roaches can be either expensive or cheap, depending on how you go about it. This also kind of goes for other roaches, but I'm going to say Dubias because that's what I have personal experience with. But they can be a little expensive to set up. I spent about $50 whenever I set up my Dubia roaches initially, but then they were very cheap to maintain. They breed super easily. They're friendly and they're cute and they're easy to hold and all of that jazz, and they can't invade your house, which is perfect. So I honestly really like these guys, and once you have the setup going, I think they're fantastic feeders. I haven't had a tarantula reject a Dubia roach yet, and another benefit is that they come in every size. I could feed a large Dubia to my Goliath bird eater, and I could feed a baby Dubia to one of my slings. So it's also very convenient. You can pick the size and all of that jazz. And the only thing you really have to worry about when maintaining these is introducing a couple new Dubias here and there for some genetic variations so they don't inbreed too much. So I'm gonna put this one S tier, since once you get the setup going, these are fantastic, and especially if you have a lot of tarantulas, then this is the cheapest option and the easiest and most convenient option. They'll eat your food scraps, all of that kind of stuff. Fantastic. I think they are fantastic. I used to have Dubia roaches, but I wasn't introducing new ones into the system, so they kind of inbred, and I eventually decided that I'm gonna stop this one until I go to my next expo and get new batches of Dubia roaches. But they were fantastic feeders, and they do not stink at all, which I love. I just hate how much crickets stink, and I wish I could keep crickets without all of the cannibalism and how they smell like death. Next up, we have hornworms. I've seen a lot of people feed these, but the deal breaker for me is that they're like $3 a pop, and that's really expensive. Like, I have over 20 tarantulas. If I fed all of them a hornworm, it would cost me a lot of money. But otherwise, I think they're very soft. I've noticed that tarantulas do like to bite them. I like them, but they do pupate pretty quickly. I'm just gonna put them in C tier, mostly because of that price, since $3 per feed for your tarantula is very expensive. That is very expensive. Though I do think they're very cute, and you can also feed the moths if they do pupate, and you can feed the chrysalises, even though the chrysalises aren't really as good as like a mealworm pupa, since they don't really move like that. But hornworms, I think they're silly. I like them. Now, I have cicadas here. I do like to feed my tarantulas cicadas. If you come from a place that doesn't really do pesticides at all, you can kind of profit off of the cicada season. I had a double cicada brood this summer, and I just fed tons of them to my tarantula. The only con is that they don't have a lot of meat in them, so they're actually quite small meals for your tarantula, and you're gonna have to clean up after them. But it's not really bad, since the tarantula loves catching these guys. And they also do not have like teeth or mouths, so they can't really bite you or bite the tarantula and hurt it, which a lot of these other animals can definitely do, especially like the grasshopper and the superworm. So I'm gonna put it on C tier just because a lot of people won't have access to this due to a ton of insecticides around the place. But if you're able to get these and you have a place that's very safe, they're completely free, and you have a great summer snack for your tarantulas. Next up is one I tried recently, and this refers to mice, which are the frozen ones. I would never feed a live mouse. I think that can really hurt your tarantulas. I've seen people feed live mice for their snakes and they get all scratched up, so imagine what it could do to a little tarantula. Now, I got pinky mice recently and I tried it out. Around half of my adults took them. The other half thought they were gross, they didn't want to touch them, they didn't want anything to do with it, and they just said no. So I ended up not giving them a lot of them. These can be a little expensive too. I got pinky mice, which are a little bigger than fuzzies, and they were around $2 each, so it was pretty pricey, again, per feed. But I think they are great if you have a tarantula who really needs to put on weight and isn't picky. Like, I fed it to my Goliath bird eater, and for some reason, since he's a boy, he's always skinny, and he's also like 7 or 8 years old, so he always looks a little too skinny, so I would feed him these, and he would take like 24 hours to eat the whole thing. Some of my tarantulas took like 48 hours. to eat the whole thing. But they are very gross to clean up. They leave a kind of like mucus thing behind, and that's very disgusting. It molds very bad. So I'm also going to put these in C tier because I think they're useful if you need to get a lot of food into your tarantula at once. But otherwise, I think they are really not a good feeder. They're gross, they're kind of a hassle. A lot of tarantulas don't want anything to do with it. So, and then the last one, I'm already going to put it in the last tier. This is disgusting. A lot of people will just feed their tarantulas slabs of meat. I think you should never do this unless you have a complete emergency. They'll just take like some fat-free beef and they'll put it in the tarantula's enclosure and hope they'll eat them. Now, this doesn't have a shell, so whenever the tarantula turns it into a slurry to lap up, then they can't really do that because it just falls apart. And also, there's a lot of bacteria on these store-bought meats, which is why you kind of want to feed live or something that was like flash frozen, like the mice. But this wasn't meant to feed tarantulas. This was meant for people who were supposed to cook it. People will also do this with fish and chicken, and I just think that is terrible. I think that's a really easy way to get your tarantulas sick. It's also a very lazy way to feed them. They're not really going to want that. They're meant to kill insects and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that is probably the worst feeder I have heard so far. Now that we have made it to the end of the list, let me know if you agree with my tiers and what other feeders you have given your tarantulas that maybe I missed on this list, because I would definitely like to do a video in the future redoing it or adding it after I hear you guys' opinions. And make sure, if you liked the video, to support me by liking and subscribing. And also, if you want to check out my Patreon to give a little more support to my channel, I will be posting there soon, and the support will really help me focus on this channel more and post more frequently, since that is my New Year resolution. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.